Thank you. And first of all, I just wanted to say, on behalf of the Human Rights Commission, thank you for the work that you've done, you and your team, on this survey. And it's at the Commission, I'm going to just talk briefly about what we do at the Commission. But at the Commission, we sometimes use things like this survey that Hong has done with the community here to help in submissions to government, we were talking earlier about potentially using some of the material in the survey so that we can help bolster some of our racial discrimination and vilification laws. So I'll get started. But first of all, I just wanted to say, when we're talking about discrimination, as you all will know, some of the situations are quite difficult to talk about and could be confronting. So I just we're going to be talking about a couple of real life case studies, as Hong has as well. So just be aware of that. And first of all, I just wanted anyone to put their hands up if you have experienced racism yourself in the community, at home, anywhere in your life. Have you experienced racism? Thank you, and thanks for sharing. And I guess it just goes to show, thank you, that racism is quite widespread, and it sort of bubbles just under the surface at times. So I'll get started. My name is Luke Winnetong, like we've said. I'm the Community Relations with the Queensland Human Rights Commission. We were formerly the Anti-discrimination Commission of Queensland. There's a new Human Rights Act that came into existence as of 2020, 1st of January 2020. So I'll just go quickly over the role, and I'm going to try not to bore you guys, so I'll keep it very simple. The Human Rights Commission, we do things like what we're doing now. We go out into the community and we run training sessions about human rights and anti-discrimination, unconscious bias, and things like that with government departments, community groups and not-for-profits. The largest part of our role is receiving and assessing Human Rights and Anti-discrimination Act complaints from members of the public in Queensland. And that's probably about 70% of the work that we do. And that includes reconciliation conferences that happen as a result of the complaints that we receive, where we get the complainant and the respondent to come together and in a form of kind of like mediation to come together to try and resolve the issue. So what does the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1991, you can see by the date, it's been around for a while. What does it actually protect people in Queensland? Well, it protects people in Queensland against unlawful discrimination. I'll quickly touch on that in a second. Sexual harassment, vilification, which is a big part of why I'm here today, I guess. It was a big part of the survey. Victimisation and unlawful requests for information. And when I say protect, we talk about attributes. So what attributes are protected under the Anti-Discrimination Act? And if we have a look, there are 16 attributes. I think that's 16. I should know this. 16 attributes that are protected under the Anti-Discrimination Act. And one of those, particularly for our talk today, is race, obviously. But there are other things like even people breastfeeding, mothers breastfeeding in a cafe, that's protected under the Anti-Discrimination Act. The difference between the Human Rights Act, which has just come in, and the Anti-Discrimination Act, I think very briefly and very broadly, I'll say that the Human Rights Act protects Queenslanders in a very broad sense from a lot of, there's a lot of limitations. Like, for example, under the Human Rights Act, freedom of movement is one of the protections, which is very relevant with COVID-19. Whereas the Anti-Discrimination Act has very specific protections in it and is not as broad as the Human Rights Act. And I'll add that quite often, as the Human Rights Act has come in, it can be that a complaint, if anyone here has had contact with us before, if you're complaining to us, could potentially be a Human Rights Act complaint and an Anti-Discrimination Act complaint all in one. So what is discrimination? I think we all probably have a picture in our head of what discrimination is, but written in the PowerPoint here is a person with a protected attribute. When I talk about attribute, I mean one of those attributes. So a person with a protected attribute is treated less favourably than someone without that attribute in an area covered by the Act, so work, superannuation, education, things like that. And so particularly relevant for the survey and this community here is obviously race. If we go back, we look at race as one of the attributes. So direct discrimination would be if you were treated differently. Let's say a lot of those survey results, we're in Earlville Shopping Centre. If you were treated differently by a shopkeeper there based on your race, that would potentially be direct discrimination. So as I mentioned, some of the areas, this is pretty boring, but you covered at work, in the areas of work, superannuation. If you're at school, accommodation, administration of state laws and programs and things like that. So this is the complaint process. So basically, under the Anti-Discrimination Act, if you make a complaint to us, and I believe there potentially might be someone in the audience who has made a complaint to us, you make a complaint in writing to us, and one of our conciliators will look at the complaint and decide whether we're going to take the complaint on. Is it relevant? Have you been discriminated against? And then, say for example, if we're at Earlville Shopping Centre, I'll use that example. Earlville Shopping Centre, the shopkeepers treated you unfavourably based on your race. One of our conciliators will assess your complaint and say that yes, we will take it on. They will send a copy of the complaint to the respondent, and that would be the shopkeeper or their company that they work for, or whoever that is. Then we would move to a conciliation conference, and that is it's kind of like mediation, where both parties would come to the table. Our conciliator will act in an impartial way, not be an advocate of either side, and try to come to a resolution. The resolution could be a number of things: apology, financial compensation, changing of policy, all sorts of things. I saw one resolution was someone wanted a new engine for their camper van. So if a resolution is reached, that's great, that's what we want. And however that happens, the complaint's closed. However, quite often the resolution's not reached, and then we move to potentially referring the matter to a further tribunal, such as Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal or the Queensland Industrial Relations Commission. And then that's more like a courtroom situation, and then evidence will be required and things like that. So really, you want it to be resolved at the conciliation conference stage. I just wanted to quickly touch on one of the things in the Anti-Discrimination Act that we talked about. We talked about discrimination, sexual harassment, and vilification. So vilification features quite prominently, obviously, in the survey. So I just wanted to quickly go over the definition of vilification. So a person must not, by a public act, incite hatred towards, serious contempt or severe ridicule of individuals or groups because of their either race, religion, sexuality or gender identity. So from my reading of the survey, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the incidents in there were potentially vilification. However, there is a type of vilification called serious vilification, and that's when, I guess, police get involved. So the difference between vilification that you can complain to the Human Rights Commission and serious vilification, which could potentially be a criminal offence. So the difference between serious vilification and vilification is serious vilification is where the vilifying statement or act is a threat of physical harm towards persons or property, or inciting others to do the same. So I've got, you can all see that picture on the screen there. So that's an example of a real life case of public vilification. As you can see, it was about 2011 in Brisbane. Someone had spray painted, I won't say what it is, you can read it yourself there on the driveway. But that's an example of a case that came to us and was eventually settled. So we took that case on. Yeah, so it's an example of what's called public vilification. Public vilification can also include neighbours yelling at each other over the back fence where there's a chance that someone in the road going past could hear. That's public vilification also. As I said, the difference between the Human Rights Act and the Anti-Discrimination Act is one's very broad and one's very specific. Another big difference with the Human Rights Act is that the Human Rights Act protects individuals in their dealings with government, basically. So government or functional public entities. We were just going to talk about some real-life case studies around discrimination. Okay, so I'm just going to read out this real-life case study. So this is an example of a discrimination complaint. So this is around alleged racial hatred on a website. So the complainant, who is of Asian background, complained about a website which he said advocated violence against Asians. The comments on the website included such lovely words as Asians take all our good jobs and careers, leaving us Aussies to have to fight and often miss out on an opportunity for spots in our universities. Asian people flood our city with their Asian shops with their language all over them, having their own dedicated Chinatown and their own suburb. And some direct quotes from the website. We understand everyone has different levels of hate for Asians, and so we have yellers. Their job is to yell at the Asians with passion, i.e. you so-and-so F off to China, and do whatever they can to show that Asians are not welcome in Australia. So on receiving the complaint, the Commission contacted the Internet Service Provider to establish the identity of the website owner, and within a few days of contacting the Internet Service Provider, they advised that the website had been disabled because it breached the ISP's acceptable use policy. So that was the first case study. The second one we've got is around race discrimination and racial hatred in employment. The complainant, who is of Chinese origin, was employed by a private utilities company. He claimed that during his employment he was subjected to racial abuse in that co-workers would mimic his accent and make comments such as bloody ching chong. The room smells like dim sum and don't hug the ching chong. He has got AIDS. He also alleged that he was treated less favourably, so what we talked about before, less favourably because of his race, in that in contrast with his other employees at his work, he was more frequently rostered to work at lunchtime and his views were not considered during his performance review. There's a long paragraph here about what the company did, but I'll just say that the company basically denied that anything was about race. So the complaint was resolved by conciliation. So the complainant agreed to withdraw his complaint and the respondent agreed to provide the complainant with a written apology and a work reference and pay him $5,000 in recognition of the embarrassment, humiliation and stress that he may have endured during his employment. Both the real-life case studies. I did want to make a point that vilification is actually hard. It's hard to prove. So Hong and I were having a discussion recently, and a lot of the stuff in the survey was people just walking past or someone driving past and yelling out a slur or something. That's hard to prove. And we recognise that at the Commission. And as a result of COVID, everything's just increased. The contacts about racial discrimination have increased to us. So the complaint process is a long process. So we've, on our website, we have a space where people can come and just report racist incidents and potentially not go through the complaints process, just so the incident's recorded. Yeah, that's all I had to say. So I don't know if we're gonna do questions at the end or now, or I've got some little brochures that Hong's got here, and I'm just going to leave them at the front. I'll hand them out. So it just basically tells you about your rights under the Anti-Discrimination Act and the Human Rights Act. And please feel free to come down and visit me if you have any dramas or you want to talk about anything that's happened to you. My card's there as well. I'll leave it at the front. Ring me if you want to chat about anything. Come down and have a visit, and we'll talk about any incidents you've got, about whether it could potentially become a complaint or you just want to talk about it. Thank you.
谢谢。